Hey, I'm Sarah and welcome to my YouTube channel, Thrills and Kills, where we talk about everything horror, thriller, and true crime. Today I'm going over my January reading wrap-up. I read 13 books in the month of January. I would say don't expect that going forward. This was a particularly stellar month for me. I was on vacation. Had time off around New Year's as well. In general, it was a slow month at work, so I was able to listen to audiobooks while I was working during the day. I would love it if every month I could read 10, 11, 12, 13 books, but I'm just going to say don't expect that going forward. So other than reading a shit ton of books, I've also been doing a lot of other fun stuff this month. Like I said, I went to Cancun for a week with my family. You can see some beautiful footage in my vlogs I posted and in some shorts. We had a beachfront villa in Cancun. It was just breathtaking. We had a challenge going in our family. Every day we kept track of margaritas and tacos and to see at the end who had the most. My husband won the taco competition, although I came in second, and then I won the margarita competition for the week by far. The most fun thing we did, we actually live on a farm. I don't necessarily talk about it all that much. Sometimes I'll put shorts with my animals, but we live on a farm and we were tractor shopping this month because we need to upgrade and get a better tractor. So I'll put some footage here. There was like a farm show down at our state capitol at the fairgrounds, and we were testing out tractors. Some of them where the tires are like taller than me. Even him, he's 6'4", and we found some where the tires were taller than him even. So we had a great time, but mostly just doing a lot of reading. So I don't know if you guys care about numbers and statistics. I do. I'm a huge nerd with that stuff. I actually put together a template moving forward for these videos, so there'll be a little bit more structure and I'm not rambling so much. So to start with, let's talk about my plans going into January. So if you were to go back and rewatch my January TBR video, what did I say I was going to do? And then at the end, we'll talk about what I actually did. My plan was to read 8 books. So 3 of them were going to be for a reading vlog, which was one by one, the Sanatorium in the Dark. I was planning on reading 2 books for book clubs. I was planning on reading episode 13, which was going to be a new release, and Notes on an Execution, which was sort of like a backlist I had on my shelves because I'm trying to make an effort of working through my shelves this year. And then there was an audiobook I wanted to listen to called Unmask Alice that I had heard about on a podcast, I think in December. That was my plan, to read 8 books, 2 of them in book clubs, try and participate in the book club, not just read the books, and then to also try and work on some reading prompts from the Books in the Freezer reading challenge. Okay, that was the plan. What I did in the end was I read 13 books. Funny enough, episode 13 was the 13th book I read, and then I kind of took a break for the last few days of January. So I read 13 books. 8 of them were fiction, 5 were nonfiction. I am trying to do better about reading more nonfiction this year. I usually read like 1 or 2 a month, so I was very happy with that, and I enjoyed all of them. 4 books were like physical books from my shelves, 7 ebooks. One of those ebooks was an ARC that I read from NetGalley. 2 of the books were from Audible. 4 books, all of the ebooks I got through my library, 3 from Libby and 1 from Hoopla. I prefer Libby to Hoopla, but the one I needed to read for my book club was on Hoopla, so there you go. 4 books between ebooks and physical books were from my backlist TBR, because I'm trying to make an effort this year to work on those. And overall, my average rating was 4.04 stars. Very good. I'm also trying to keep track of my channel growth. I thought that'd be fun at the end of every month with these wrap-ups, kind of just show the growth I've had. Not that I necessarily care about having a big channel. I just think it's a fun way to kind of reflect on where you've come from and where you are now. So at the beginning of January till the end of January, I gained 100 new subscribers and I posted 7 full-length videos, a little less because I was away for vacation for a whole week. So I'm going to start off with the books that I liked the least and work my way up to the books that I liked the best. I'm actually starting off, I'm not quite sure where to put these. I'll just put them here. There are actually 2 books that I read in December. However, I filmed my wrap-up video, I think on like Christmas or day after Christmas, and I read them between when I filmed the video and January 1st. So the first one I actually DNF'd, which is Helen Oyeyemi's White is for Witching. I got maybe 50 pages in. It wasn't working for me. I really was not understanding what was happening at all. It is what it is, but somehow I own 2 copies of this book. The second book that I read, and actually is one of my top favorite books of all time now, is Mary, An Awakening of Terror by Nat Cassidy. Love that book so much. I'm gonna have to do its own separate video. I'm not gonna talk about it here. Just wanted to include it in purposes of fully showing what I've read recently. Okay, so for January, I actually did have 2 books that I DNF'd, and I have a really hard time with this first one, how to describe it, because while it didn't work for me, it's not a bad book, and it's a memoir, so I'm trying to be very respectful. So this is Sex Cult Nun by Faith Jones. She grew up in the Children of God cult. Her grandfather actually started the cult, and she is living over in China, actually Macau, but Asia, China. She's living over there with her family, and in this memoir, she's talking about growing up in the cult in this big family, and there are graphic depictions of abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional. And so it's not that the book is bad. I physically could not take it anymore. It just goes to a degree far above and beyond anything I've ever read in other memoirs or even in fiction books pertaining to abuse in various forms. I give her a lot of credit for being so brave. Number 1, getting out of that cult. Number 2, like facing her trauma. And 3, writing about it in a book. It's just not something I personally could handle. I was borderline felt like I should be on a watch list, because I actually was listening to the audiobook. Felt like I was going to get put on a watch list for listening to what I was listening to. It was that graphic. So that's the first one I DNF'd. The second one I DNF'd is pretty disappointing. This is called Ghostland, History of America and Haunted Places. I got this from the library, so no harm, no foul that I didn't finish it. It just was not what I was expecting. I thought it was going to lean more into like hauntings and not so much like history, if that makes sense. It was, some chapters were better than others. It just wasn't quite giving me what I was looking for, so I DNF'd it. Okay, now my 3-star books. I had 3 3-star books this month. The first one is The Sanatorium by Sarah Pierce. I read this as part of that reading vlog, Snowy Isolated Thrillers. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I went into so much detail in that vlog. However, the reason I didn't score it higher, the ending wasn't so great for me. There was some very unrealistic behaviors and in this relationship between these siblings that was like, you would not possibly remember that from your childhood. That's weird, and it's playing like the central plot. The big reveal was very unrealistic. As someone who works in healthcare, and I know like that's not how a human body and like memories and brains work, short of having a traumatic brain injury, that was unrealistic. And there was a part, also one of the other reveals, where you're given the motive for why what's happening is happening, and there was a motive sort of like from a historical point of view that's like chickens coming home to roost, and then there was like this person and their own need for revenge. The historical motive, I was wanting to get so much more of that, and it just didn't go that route. I really was hoping we would get more information about, I don't want to give too much away. If you've read the book, I was hoping we were going to learn more about the history of that sanatorium and what was going on there, and it just didn't give me as much. So that's all I'll say about that one. Under the Banner of Heaven by John Krakauer. This was also a 3-star. This is a true story about these 2 brothers and their accomplices who murdered their sister-in-law and niece because they received a revelation from God to do so. And it flips back and forth between their actions and their crime and what led up to that, but also historically with Joseph Smith, the founding of Mormonism, how they moved from New England to the Midwest all the way out to Utah, how they've been kind of fraught with controversy ever since their founding. Very interesting, very bloody book. I find the subject matter, the content, super, super interesting. I have family that are Mormon, not fundamentalist, mainstream Mormon. and I think I'll keep most of my thoughts to myself so I don't offend people. But knowing what I know about them and what I was exposed to spending summers with them, I've just always had an interest in why they do what they do. We'll say that. So I'm rating it a 3-star, not because of lack of interest in the content. It was the way it was written, his writing style. It was just so dense. It was a slog to get through it. Like, I would read what felt like for hours, and then I would have gone like 10% in the book. It was just a slog to get through it. So interesting subject matter. I think I would try to pick up something else if I was wanting to read about that some more. And then the third 3-star book is Dead Mountain, The Untold True Story of Dyatlov Pass by Donnie Eicher. This was for the True Crime Book Club. I found this book quite interesting. This is about a true story that happened in 1959. There were a group of college students who went missing on a 2-week hiking expedition in winter in Siberia. They did have one friend who turned back early for medical reasons. He's the lone survivor, and he helped sort of alert the school that they're not back yet, something's wrong. The government and the school went out and did a whole search and rescue mission, came across their bodies. They had all passed, but they had all passed in very odd circumstances, and it's been a mystery ever since then. People don't really know what happened. They clearly left the tent in the middle of the night, no shoes, not dressed for the elements. Their bodies were found very mysterious markings and just some, I don't want to give too much away, just very odd things that would make you think this was foul play. And Donnie Eicher is an American filmmaker, and he stumbled across this case online and went down a rabbit hole and was interested in trying to solve it. And he traveled to Russia a few times, went actually on a hike up to this dead mountain where they all perished. And he later met with some scientists, and he writes about it in the book. In the end, does have a hypothesis for what happened. Again, a situation where the subject matter is quite interesting, but the way it's written, writing style, was a bit of a slog. So very similar to Under the Banner of Heaven. Okay, because I'm a very bad decision maker, this next book is a 3.5 star. 3-star felt a little unfair, but it wasn't quite a 4-star. So we're following the 3.5 star, and this is The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocum. Going into this, I thought this was going to be a thriller about a missing violin, like a violin heist of the most expensive, rare violin in the entire world. It was sort of that, but also not, which is probably why it's not being rated higher. So anyways, we're following Ray. He is a young violinist, is that the word? And he has this family heirloom. We'll come to find out this family heirloom is a very, very rare Stradivarius violin, and it opens up the book with "It's been stolen." And he is in the middle of training for this prestigious competition. I don't know if this is a real competition, the Tchaikovsky competition. It's like the Olympics of classical music. Anyways, you're flipping back and forth between present day, him trying to find a new violin and prepare for the biggest competition of his whole entire career, and historically going back through like his later teens and early 20s of how he became such a good violinist, how he came across this violin, etc. There is a lot of family drama involved. It is written by an African-American author who is a violinist himself in my general area. And so he does include experiences of racism. That I read some interviews where he took actual experiences that he lived through and then tweaked them a bit for the story of this book. But it includes racism, slavery, family trauma, generational trauma, just some very fraught, fractured family relationships that were quite sad. So in many ways, it was a very beautiful book. The parts where he was writing about classical music, the writing was very strong, and honestly, I was like getting very absorbed in the story. But then the other part where it's sort of like the investigation or telling the history of the character, that did not feel as strong. So how do I want to say this? I'm not trying to sound mean, because I've certainly never written a book and couldn't written a book, but it almost came across as someone who is a very good musician writing a book rather than an author writing a book and then trying to learn about music, if that makes sense. It was still quite good. I learned a lot about some different types of classical music I never knew about. It just never really became a thriller. I'm not quite sure why it was advertised as such. I think that's the biggest reason for like the letdown I felt at the end of it, that despite it being a good book, it just wasn't a thriller and therefore wasn't really for me. All right, now let's move on to 4-star books. I read 5 4-star books in January. Some of these I'm not going to go into too much detail. I did a mid-month wrap-up video, so rather than make this video ungodly long, you can go to that one for more details. But the first 4-star I actually listened to this was Unmask Alice. This is talking about the Go Ask Alice like found diary book that came out in the 70s, and I was growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, and it was still in my middle school and high school. But essentially the woman who wrote this was a fraud. She was a very conservative woman, and she was against sort of the counterculture of the 60s and 70s and like the revolution of young people and hippie lifestyle, free love, rise of drug use, that kind of thing, coupled with Nixon and his war on drugs and some other things happening in American culture at the time. She wrote this book. It was not a found diary. She wrote it because she was trying to get something out there to show teenagers the dangers of the hippie movement and of drug use, etc. And so it was really meant to be like a scared straight tactic, which it worked well. It was one of the best-selling books of all time. However, when you hear about the fraud and deception, not just with the Go Ask Alice book, but with future found diaries such as Jay's journal, the damage that she did to families who these books were actually based on, the damage that she did to readers and her own family, it is quite sad and in many ways despicable. I don't have anything nice to say about that woman, Beatrice Sparks. The book is very, very interesting, and again, it doesn't just talk about her and her books, it talks about the publishing industry and how much they were in on the fraud, Nixon's war on drugs and what was happening politically, culturally, and in like religious spheres in America in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then it gets into satanic panic. Very, very interesting book. However, at the end, the author does say, Rick Emerson, that he uses publicly found sources. He doesn't really have like a whole index of sources you can go look to, which is my one detractor. He says you can Google this stuff, and I did, and some of it is quite easily found, and he did a lot of interviews, so it's not like you could pull up an index of resources for many of these things because they were interviews that he had with people. So I guess if you're going to read it, I would just say then go do your own due diligence, your own research afterwards. Don't just run with everything he says as fact. But from the research I've done afterwards, it seems like the book was quite truthful. Okay, my next 4-star reads were part of that reading vlog that I did. We've got The Dark by Emma Houghton and then One by One by Ruth Ware. These are both closed circle, isolated, snowy thrillers. The Dark takes place in Antarctica in the winter, and the fear I felt for this main character being stuck, don't even talk about the thriller and the killer. Aside from that, being stuck in Antarctica in the winter, it's dark 24/7, and you are in this little pod, and if the heat or if the electric goes out, you'll freeze to death. That alone was like nightmare fuel. I really enjoyed both of these books. If you go watch that vlog, you'll see me break it down into much more detail. I did prefer The Dark more than One by One, but they were both quite strong. Ruth Ware is one of my favorite thriller authors. One by One is similar, a closed circle, isolated winter thriller with a killer on the loose, but that is in the French Alps, not in Antarctica. Okay, my next 4-star. This is an ARC. This comes out in July. This is called Burn the Negative by Joshua Winning. This is going to be such a popular book in a few months. I can just tell. This is a found footage, cursed footage type story, but also kind of like a demonic possession type story. Anyways, there is this woman named Laura. She is a journalist and she lives in the UK. She is headed to LA to write a story about this TV series that's coming to the small screen. This TV series is based on a movie that came out previously called The Guest House. It came out in the 90s, and it was thought to be cursed because every single person who starred in that movie met an untimely death, except for the one little girl who was the lead character. Fast forward, that little girl is now Laura, and so she has been tricked by her boss into going back to LA to cover this story. She doesn't realize what she's going to cover, so that was a little bit far-fetched in the beginning. Anyways, she gets to LA and things go awry very quickly. People are dying all over again. She is sort of being implicated, but she thinks everyone else is in it and she's the one in danger. And it just follows her trying to unravel what is actually happening. What happened with the first book or the first movie, and then what's happening now that this is happening again? Is it a copycat? Is it her? Is it some supernatural being? It was so good. I really enjoyed it. The author is clearly a long-term horror fan because there are so many little Easter eggs sprinkled in there with references to old school horror books and movies. His lead character is like obsessed with Winona Ryder, and so she's constantly making little references. Like if she's trying to like pump herself up because she's scared, she'd be like, okay, what would Winona do? It was just a fun book. I love anything that's like found footage, cursed footage. It definitely changed like subgenres or even like tropes, let's say, partway through the book, and I was like, oh, that's not the direction I thought this was gonna go. That's fun. And then I'll say the only other like thing I had wrong with it, which is why it's not a 5-star, is the beginning was a little far-fetched, and then the ending. There was multiple points where it felt like the book could have ended, and I thought that would have ended stronger if he had ended it earlier than with the actual ending. I don't want to say much more for obvious reasons, but it's going to be, I think, a very popular book in a few months. I think we're going to see it everywhere. It's called Burn the Negative. So fun. Quick read. Okay, and then the last 4-star, this is a nonfiction. This is called Broken Faith. This is following the Word of Faith Fellowship cult, which I didn't know this when I picked up the book. This cult is very close to me. So there we are. It's just a few hours away. So this is following this crazy freaking woman named Jane Whaley, and it's still to this day ongoing, this cult that she put together in North Carolina, and it's massive. She's got other churches in like Belize and Ghana. Like the amount of people that have come to follow her is just, it's beyond anything you could imagine. But this cult is known for its abuse of not just children, of all members. But the thing is, they're so powerful, and they have people in the sheriff's office and the local DA, all throughout the local government in that county that it's in, that they've never really been shut down or found guilty of anything. Anyways, multiple people who have left the cult are interviewed throughout this book. They paint a very good picture from the beginning of Jane Whaley and how she became like a pastor, and then how it turned into a cult, to present day. This book I think only came out in like 2020 or 2021. They are known, like I said, for the abuse of people, specifically through this thing called blasting. So they think that demons are all amongst us, and like constantly there's demons in us and around us and trying to take over us. And so you could do the smallest thing wrong. Literally, there was a point where a kid was playing soccer, and this Jane Whaley was like, the soccer demon has you. We got to get that devil out of you. And they would strap people down. Even little kids would strap them to chairs, and they get in their face and they're screaming at them at the top of their lungs for hours, like trying to do like an exorcism. People have gotten very ill or harmed from this. There have been multiple investigations by like Department of Social Services. Nothing's just ever happened. There are claims of slavery because they take people over from Belize. They say, oh, you're going to come here and you're going to learn from our church and we're going to like train you. Well, no, once they get there, Jane Whaley and her minions would take their passports, and then they're forced to work ungodly long hours for no money, like working on her house. There's a scene where they're like doing her patio or her pool maintenance. Just despicable things that you hear about. And of course, with many cults, there's sexual abuse of children where the adults know about it, and there's evidence that Jane knew about it, did nothing about it. There are also, there's podcasts out there. The best one I have found is the Pretend podcast, season 3. He calls it The Prophet, and the entire like 9 or 10 episodes are about Jane Whaley and her cult, the Word of Faith Fellowship. It's a very good book, but there was a part, I mean, it started strong and ended strong. There was a part midway where it felt like a little bit like, okay, come on, like I've heard this, like we're hearing the same thing over and over. So that's just why it didn't blow me away. It wasn't a 5-star. All right, it's time to talk about my 5-star books, the best books I read this month. And honestly, some of these are going to make it to my favorites of the whole year and probably like new favorite of all time books. So let's get into it. This first one I also talked about a lot in my mid-month wrap-up. This is The Witch of Tin Mountain by Paulette Kennedy. It was formally published on February 1st. I read it in January because it was part of the Prime reading. The first of every month you can pick books for free, and I chose this. This is sort of a Southern Gothic with witches, but historical fiction in Arkansas. There's a lot of LGBTQ plus representation, people of color representation. There's a lot happening, told through multiple timelines, following multiple generations of women. But basically, persecution of women who are thought to be witches in the rural South, fight between religion and those who are seen to be witches, like the tale as old as time. The setting is absolutely beautiful. The author is from the Ozarks. I've spent time in the Ozarks, mountain biking in that area specifically, and the way she describes it is like just the way that I remember it. Beautiful, beautiful writing. It's a fantastic book. It's quite immersive. I loved all the representation of different people, of mental illness, of all kinds of things. It was a very, very topical book for many reasons. Things like postpartum depression, the rights of women, bodily autonomy. I mean, it covers everything, everything. It reads more like a Southern Gothic with witches than it does a historical fiction. I did see someone, I think Megan reads about whether it would be close to Slewfoot or not. Slewfoot, I think, is much more of a historical fiction read than this one is. Maybe because it's only going as far back as like the Civil War, and then it's more the early 1900s, but it's very, very easy read. I think I read it in like a day and a half. There is this demon, who knows, who has been plaguing this family of witches with every generation, and he keeps popping up in a different form, and they're trying to find a way to get rid of him for good. It's quite unique. I haven't read anything like this before, and the fact that it takes place in the South and it's got all the like Southern colloquialism, like funny sayings. If you're not from the South, I think you'll enjoy them. If you're from the South, you'll definitely enjoy them because you'll have heard them yourself before. But anyways, it was a great book. I loved it. Okay, this next one, All the Living and the Dead, a personal investigation into the death trade. I actually went and bought a physical copy because I enjoyed the audiobook so much. I wanted to have it on my shelves, but this is the UK copy. I think it's more beautiful than the American copy. Anyways, this was through the Morbidly Curious book club. I think everyone in the book club gave it like 4 stars or higher. I have always been a morbidly curious person, like a little Wednesday Addams, ever since I was a kid. People thought I was weird. Even my friends will make jokes about like, haha, you've got like a dark little soul, but whatever. I know what I like, and it's this. And I really appreciate that at the beginning of the book, the author, Haley Campbell, was sort of explaining she was the same way and how she's always had an interest in the macabre. And I think a lot of times people think we're weird and think about like the satanic panic and all that. We're not weird if we enjoy this stuff. I personally became a nurse. I worked in the ICU. I brushed up against death on a daily basis with my job. And then I also have worked in organ transplant, sort of seeing both sides of the coin, right? Like when death happens, but then the silver lining, which is the gift of life. So it's just something I've always been interested in. But I never knew, let's say, all the people that it makes to make the death world go round. You're left thinking at the end, like, just how thankful you are that people like embalmers exist and people who do like CSI investigations. Like if you or a fan member were to die today, it takes a lot of people with a lot of training, education, experience, and like love for their craft in a way to respectfully handle you or your loved one from beginning to the end. It talks to people who run funeral homes, people who maintain cemeteries. There's even an executioner, and every time she's interviewing somebody, the author tries to get to like their psyche and try to understand what is it that made them interested in the death trade, what brought them to it, and the answers people have are quite interesting. I found the executioner chapter the most interesting. Not that like I want to be an executioner and I've got very complicated thoughts about the death penalty. He's actually deceased now, so it's a shame you can't like go interview him or like find more information about him. But the gentleman she talks to was an executioner for the state of Virginia for almost 20 years. And he explains kind of how he had to like decompartmentalize, and even his wife didn't know that he was the state executioner for like the first like 15 or 17 years or something like that. Like that's how much he like schismed it off from the rest of his life, that even his own wife didn't know. that he was, I mean, it's wild to think about. Anyways, I loved this book. So many interesting things, like even in like roles I never even knew existed, or companies and whole industries I never knew existed. It's just, some people are obviously very odd ducks, and that, like, yeah, you should be working with dead people because you don't have the emotional intelligence to work with living people. But many of the people are just super kind and like want to do good in the world, want to give back. They care about people deeply, and this is just the way that they do it. Just like someone like myself who's a nurse and like works with the living, but these people just do it with the dead. So beautiful, beautiful book. I absolutely loved it. The next 5-star read is kind of a funny segue, is Jana Kafka's Notes on an Execution. The writing in this, look at my little tabs, some of the most beautiful writing I've ever read in a book. Like up there with like Daphne du Maurier, Charlotte Bronte level of writing. Just beautiful, but without being like overly, like what's that term, purple prose and overly flowery. Anyways, there is this man named Ansel, and he is sitting in his cell on death row, and he's counting down like the last 12 hours to his time of execution, and interspersed with him telling you his story, there are women in his life who are telling the story of their experiences with him, kind of how he came in or out of his life, and how he impacted them forever, or they impacted him. So people like his mother, his sister-in-law, a childhood friend who's now the detective, etc. And he tells you a very different, maybe not set of circumstances, but very different justification for why things happen versus when you hear from their point of view. And it's very interesting. It also brings up arguments of like the ethics of true crime and true crime as entertainment, and how we know Ted Bundy and we know what he looks like, and we know Jeffrey Dahmer, but could you name their victims, and how there should be more attention paid to the victims than to these nobody serial killers and criminals. And there's even a part in here that talks about, you know, let's say someone goes through the criminal justice system and they are convicted, found guilty, and now they're going to be serving their life sentence or the death penalty, what have you. That's really not justice. It doesn't bring somebody back. Like, even though we call it the criminal justice system, it falls so short of being able to bring any true justice to the victim and their families. And it just brought up a lot of complicated thoughts. Again, like the death penalty. What do you think about that? So there's the story itself that's quite interesting, but the deeper story in the discussion around the true crime, the ethics of true crime as entertainment, etc. Just very, very interesting and very beautiful writing. Okay, my final 5-star and my favorite book of the whole month, possibly of the whole year, is Episode 13 by Craig DeLuey. This is a brand new release, just came out on the 24th. This is a found footage epistolary style format, following a paranormal investigation team that went missing when they investigated the Foundation House, which is the most haunted house in all of America, for their TV show Fade to Black. I cannot say enough good things about this book. I recently did an entire reading vlog about it, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. You can check that out for my full thoughts and reactions as I read it in real time. I'll say it starts off totally paranormal. Partway through the book, it takes a hard left turn and kind of becomes something else. There's a creepy ass well down in the basement that they decide to fiddle around with. There are flashbacks to the 1970s with the prior investigative team that also went missing. There's just a lot of weird hippy dippy shit that happens in this book. I loved it. You hear from every character's point of view in their own words through their diary entries, their emails, their texts to their friends and family. We get transcripts of footage that was found after they went missing. Just, it was so good, so good. I cried, I laughed, there was tension. Very good. That's all I'll say. Check out my reading vlog for my full thoughts, but I'm now on a mission to get everyone to read this book. I won't stop talking about it. Anywho, that is everything I read and book related stuff that I did in the month of January. I recently posted my February TBR. Coming up soon, I'll have a video all about cults. I might actually have to split it into 2 videos. Let me know what you think. I did a lot of research about cults, looking at sociology and psychology journal articles, watching videos with experts, researchers on cults. So I want to go into who joins cults, what makes it a cult versus just like mainstream religion, who is vulnerable to join cults, the language of cults that are used to keep people in. And then I've got some recommendations at the end as far as like podcasts, fiction and nonfiction books, movies, etc. It's just the whole research aspect it might be a very long video. I might have to split it in two. But that's everything I did last month. So let me know, what was your favorite book that you read in January? Because I'm always looking for something new to read. Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.